and welcome back to the Flipside of Midlife. I'm Karli Newman. This is the place for women in midlife and beyond who want to feel connected, inspired, hopeful, and more satisfied with life than ever before. Lucky for you, I have an amazing guest with me here today. Her name is Genise Dawson. I've invited her to join me here today because she is a woman in midlife. She's a mom. She's a grandma. She has a very vibrant professional life, and she's got very inspiring stories to share with us here today. Welcome, Genise. It is so fabulous to have you here today.
Hello. Thank you. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, I should probably share with our listeners. I do know Genise personally, not incredibly well, but I did meet her about a year ago at some of the events that I've hosted in Phoenix, and she inspires me. She knows who she is. She is very strong in her beliefs and in her opinions. However, she is a very good communicator and makes you feel seen and heard as she's communicating. So I wanted to get to know more about her, and I know you're going to enjoy getting to know her. So, Genise, I asked you to write a bio so that I could introduce you. I've used hardly any of it so far because there's so much more to your story than I would have ever known.
Yeah.
I would really love for you to share in your words a little bit about your younger years and how some of the adversity came into your life and how you overcame it.
Okay. Gosh, it's a book. It's a book. I am the only girl of three brothers. I was born in Santa Clara, California. We moved to Arizona, actually, to come on vacation with my mom's friend. And I ended up getting scarlet fever and ended up having to stay here. So we stayed here for 4 years. Then from here, we moved to Seattle, which is where I spent most of my childhood and most of my life. That is where I will always say I'm from Seattle, even though I've lived in these other places. Seattle is home for me, and Seattle is what I feel when I think of home. We moved there the day Mount St. Helens erupted, so May 18th, 1980.
Wow, that's a memorable date.
Yes, that is. I don't know if that's the reason why I'm so connected to Seattle, but I just feel really connected to Seattle. So I grew up there. I have three brothers. My older brother, he's 7 years older than me. And then I have a younger brother who is 18 months younger than me. And then I have a younger brother who's 13 years younger than me, and he's adopted. I grew up in that area on the north side of Seattle, right by the University of Washington. And that is where I spent most of my childhood. And I grew up primarily in a predominantly white community. My mother was married a few times, but the most impactful time I would say is when she was married to my stepdad, who was a pastor. He was a Messianic pastor. So he was born into an Orthodox Jewish home. He had gave his life to Christ and became a Messianic Jew. And from there, that's where he opened up a church. And then by age 15, he didn't like me. So he asked me to leave home. So I was pushed out of my home at 15. It was the worst and the best thing that happened to me because I was then taken in by a friend of mine from high school, whose father, he founded the Black Panther Party of Seattle. His name is Elmer Dixon. And he had the most tremendous impact on my life from that point on. And I believe that is who set the tone and the foundation of who I am, even though I was 15 when I met him. I had my daughter when I was 18. I had my son when I was 24. We'll talk about my career, but I worked from the time I had Brittany till I'm still working now. No wealth yet. And I've had tremendous amounts of experiences throughout that time.
So at 15, that was a big thing. What an amazing place to land.
Yeah.
Can you just touch on how living in that home with, did you say Elmer Dixon? Is that correct?
Elmer Dixon, yeah.
Yes. How that impacted you as a 15-year-old girl?
What he taught me about strength is that it doesn't have to be hard.
Oh.
He gave me so much soft love that I'd never had before, and I never associated softness and kindness, health, and all these good things with strength. I always felt like you had to put on this united front and just be this strong person and be stoic and hide all these things. But he brought out all of those things in me that let me know that he's a strong man. He's a protector. He's a provider. He loves his wife. They've been married for 53 years. And he's in love with his wife as much today as he was the day that they got together. And he just showed me about love. He showed me about strength. He showed me about respecting myself and having faith and confidence in who I am as a person, because I just didn't have that reinforcement growing up.
And that's a really formative time in any teenager's life, but I think especially in a girl's life, to see those things modeled for her when she hasn't to this point.
Right, right. Prior to me living with them, I went to school with his daughter. We were good friends, and I would hang out at her house and he would take me home. I remember one day that sticks to me is he stops the car and he parks the car in front of my house and goes, "Do you know that you're like really smart and you can be whatever you want?" And I was like, yeah. In the moment, I didn't think that, but it really was a seed that he planted in me about the capabilities that I have and the things that I'm able to do, whether I take the traditional path or not.
So you said planted the seed. I just heard a saying the other day, the day you plant the seed is not the day you eat the fruit.
That's a fact. That is a fact. It's so true.
Yes. Genise, that gets us through your childhood for the most part. Talk to me about school and then how your early career days went and how you started all of that.
Okay, let's talk about high school. I was a horrible student. I was too immature for high school. I have always had this childlike behavior, demeanor. I think I was bored. I just was not interested. And so I skipped so much. I skipped so much school. So I remember my sophomore year, the counselor brought me in. And it was one of those schools where you were free to, it's like college. You can go to class. It's your loss if you don't come, but you can come. And I wasn't ready for that. So I didn't go ever. And so the counselor brought me in to talk to me and my mom. And this is before my mom's at her wits end with me. And the counselor's like, "I'm just really concerned. You're not going to graduate high school." And I was like insulted. I was like, "What? Yes, I am." She's like, "No, you've already flunked the 9th grade. You're not going to graduate. You just should just get your GED." And I was just like, my what? My GED? Like, I was so offended. And I was like, "Well, you just watch. I'm going to graduate." And I changed nothing. Let's just be clear. I changed nothing about my behaviors in high school. I didn't do anything more until my mom kicked me out and I had to go live with Elmer and family. And Dad would be at that school every day. I could not skip school. The kids used to hang out in the parking lot. And I remember my dad driving up and I'm like, "Oh, shit." And he's like, "What you doing?" And I'm like, I'm not going to class." He's like, "Yeah, let's go to class together." And so like he went to all my teachers, and my mom never did that. Like no one ever like checked to make sure that what I said was true. Man, he went to all my classes and the teacher's like, "Yeah, she hasn't been here in 5 days," or "She hasn't been like," and so that was it. So after that, I was on the straight and narrow. So I went to school. I finished high school. I had to go to night school. I got pregnant in high school. So I got pregnant when I was my senior year. I had to go to PE at night. That's how bad my grades were. I flunked in the 9th grade, almost flunked the 10th grade. And I had to go to school pregnant and all tired at night, everything. But I graduated on time. When it came time to go to college, of course, I couldn't get into a regular university, but I went to community college and I just wasn't interested again. I just was like, this is not for me. This is just too structured. And I had test anxiety. So that also didn't help with the motivation to stay in school. I get super anxious about taking tests. I wouldn't even remember my name half the time. Like it was crazy. It was pretty bad. And so I was like, why am I wasting money? I'm just going to go to work. And so that's what I did. I just worked. I started working at the Limited. Then my stepdad, even though I was kicked out the house, I don't know how we came together. My mom asked me if I wanted to work at his church. And honestly, I didn't, but I needed a job. So I came and worked at his church in his office. I was the office assistant and I did that for 2 years. And that actually, I had a manager there who drove me crazy. She's one of those perfectionists, and I always felt like she was picking on me, but she taught me so much. And then I worked for an event planning company and then for ADP. That's what it's called now. I was an analyst, and then I was an account executive. And then my friend who worked at a staffing agency called me and she was like, hey, I have this job for you. And her job, she typically would hire software testers, but somehow this role for a benefits administrator landed in her lap. And she's like, I think you'd be good for the job. So I went in for the interview and they hired me on the spot. And I've been there now 24 years later. I'm still at Microsoft. I worked in HR and then I transitioned over into the product group because I felt like they have more fun. I went and became an executive assistant for a manager that was up and coming, and he was just a GM. And at Microsoft, a GM is a big deal, but it's not that big of a deal. I had no idea where the trajectory of his career would go. I just landed with someone and ended up with someone who was really moving up in the company. And I learned so much from him. And so I stayed with him until he became the executive vice president, which is the role he's in now. I think it was in 2018. Being an executive assistant at Microsoft and being one in general, you're on 24/7. There's no downtime. And so my kids missed a lot of me. And I was married. My husband missed a lot of me at the time. Work was number one. And so when he became an executive vice president, I was tapped out. My daughter was having her first child. And I was like, I'm not missing out on my granddaughter's life. So I got to figure this out. So I went to him and I was like, I'm willing to leave the company if I have to, because I want a job that doesn't require me to be on. And he was like, yeah, so you're not leaving. We're going to find you another role. And that's what they did. And I'm still working in his office. I still work with him technically, but I run our recruiting operations. So the intern programs and early in profession programs for the organization. And it's a 56,000 person organization. So it's not small.
You shared a little bit about your current role with me, and it seems like it's a lot. That's a lot of responsibility, a lot of different types of tasks that you're doing. Can I just pause and say you came a really long way in a time when you had to have a degree. You can't work here if you don't have a degree. You're not going to have certain roles if you don't have a degree. That's overcoming that roadblock that stood in your way, but obviously it didn't stop you. Do you have any examples of when you came up against some challenges that questioned you not having a degree? Or were you just so fabulous, they were like, nope, you're hired?
Quite honestly, no, I didn't have that challenge,
Okay.
which kind of led me to an alternate universe, because I hear people who say they do have those challenges, but I never really had that challenge. In fact, a lot of times my peers, they didn't know I didn't have a degree. I'm in this executive space. I'm in with these people who have, my boss, he has an executive MBA from Harvard. I learned so much from him, and I'm really good at mirroring people. That was really how I was able to navigate that space and sustain myself, because I'm one of those people that I learn by doing and I learn by watching. I just would really try to mimic the way he led and the things that he would do, even all the way down to his body language. He wasn't the type of person that would yell at you or get upset. He was never that type of person. He was very humble. He was we call him Zen. Me and a couple of coworkers would make jokes about him because he'd be in a meeting but the pressure's on, right? And you don't want to disappoint dad. That's what we always say, like, oh God, we disappointed dad. Oh my God, what are we going to do? I use that as my way to teach me how to navigate the space, how to show up with business acumen, how to have executive presence, and all these things that I needed to do to be in the space and be able to survive. Being in that space gave me so many opportunities. Don't get me wrong, even though I had confidence, there was a lot of imposter syndrome that happened. This principal program manager was asking me to mentor him, to tell him how he can navigate and get into a higher role. Like, what? Of course, I know it had a lot to do with my proximity to the leader, but you got to take advantage of it if you got it. I just would totally be surrounded by these people. And I remember this one guy, he was like, so what college did you go to? And I was like, I didn't go to college. He's like, no, that's not true. I was like, no, I didn't go to college. Honestly, that was the precipice for us starting our inclusive hiring program that we currently do right now. It's an apprenticeship where it's people who've taken non-traditional paths for whatever reason, second chance at life, whatever it is. and want to come into the tech space. I actually lead that program where we do our forecasting of how many people we want to be able to slot into positions across the organization. And none of these people have traditional college degrees. They come in, they work for 16 weeks, they do class for 4 weeks, and then all the rest is on the job training. And then they get an offer, just like we do our interns. I would like to say that some of that experience of working with someone like myself, who, even though I don't have a degree, it doesn't mean I'm not smart. I know I'm smart. I just need the opportunity to show what I'm capable of doing. And so that's what it was here too.
Let's talk about imposter syndrome here for a moment, because everybody experiences it in whatever realm it happens to be. I know listeners and watchers that are out there, you have experienced imposter syndrome. You feel it at times. Can you give us some of the things, maybe a personal pep talk or however you work through that?
For me, I had to take a step back sometimes. So you're in the middle of it and you're like, why would they want to know me? Or why would they want to hear from me? And honestly, it would be my partner, my husband, or if I'm divorced now. So if the guy I was dating, actually I was dating a guy who was a former executive vice president and he was retired. And I would talk to him about it and he'd be like, girl, you are in spaces that people would die. They're working their asses off today to get to that space. And you have a knowledge that so many people aspire to get, and you're getting it for free. And you're getting it without having had to go through that whole starting at the bottom, hoping that your manager notices your contribution. You were able to get connected with someone with power and influence relatively early in your career and take you there. If you didn't belong in that space, trust to believe you wouldn't be there. Honestly, it wasn't me per se. It was always people I had in my corner. My personal board of directors is what I would call them. People to tell me.
You mentioned being a mentor for others. Did you have any official mentors in your career?
I did. I had 2 mentors, but then I had, of course, my moments of people that I really respected that I could sit down and just have a conversation with about what I'm working through and help me see things through another lens. My first mentor at Microsoft was when I was working in HR and I wanted to transition over into the product group. And I was like, maybe I could do consulting because I was an account executive prior to coming. Maybe I go back into that, but I really don't like sales. I'm not really into that. And she was in consulting. I think what stood out for me, I went to a women's conference, which I don't go to very often. I just happened to be there, so it was meant to be. I would say I'm an alpha female, but I don't really look to others for validation or approval. I just am who I am, right? Take it or leave it. She had that same spirit and she worked with all men. And I'm used to working with all men as well. First of all, these are tech guys. Okay. They think they are the next coming to Christ because they're making technology that changes the world and all that good stuff. You have to deal with some big egos constantly. At Microsoft, add that times 10, especially in sales. Because at Microsoft in sales, it's very hard to get in there and to do that. To imagine being a woman, the only woman navigating that. And she talked about how she was trying to show up so that they wouldn't know that she was a woman, right? She was one of the guys versus a girl that was in the midst of all these men. That just really stood out for me because I could relate. She was my first mentor and she just gave me some really good gems about not taking things personal and being just true to who I am. And there's nothing personal about this work that we do. This is a job. Learn how to compartmentalize the things that are not important and don't flip out over things that are not important and stuff like that. She was a great mentor. My other mentors have been other VPs in the org who gave me great advice about how to navigate some things. And then there's my manager who I was with. I was his EA for 15 years. I just learned so much watching him. And he was one of those people that would let me sit in all his spaces. I could sit in any meeting I wanted to, and I just absorb everything about how he conducted himself in the meeting, his expectations of his leadership team. He was not easy, but he was not hard. And he was very empathetic. He was an empathetic leader and people respected him, genuinely respect him because he had such a high regard, not just even to his leadership team, even to the CEO. The CEO wrote in his book about him because he's super smart, but he's super humble. He's the only guy that I know, fun fact, who will check Bill Gates. Okay. So he's amazing. And I don't know if you've heard about those Bill Gates stories, but they're pretty intense.
Oh, the things you must know. Don't worry, I won't ask you to share any of them.
Right.
No secret sharing. Genise, we've had a great conversation so far about your external world. I'd like to have you touch a little bit more on your self-confidence. You said you are who you are. You've always had that spirit. Sounds like you had it in high school, and I still see it today. Talk to me about how you maintain that. And then I want to also know about your self-care. How do you take care of Genise?
So my self-confidence, if I'm honest, I'm more self-confident in some spaces than others. In my professional life, I feel like I have a lot more self-confidence because I walk the walk, talk the talk. I've had people that have reinforced the fact that I have making an impact and that I matter to the business and I add value to the business. So I think that's helped boost my self-confidence. And my dad, even to this day, I refer to him as my dad, even though he's not my biological dad. But my dad, I probably get a message every week from him about how much he loves me, how proud he is of me, that I'm strong. When I was going through a divorce with my husband, or I was going to divorce him, he went to my dad and he was like, what do? I want to keep our marriage, blah, blah, blah. And my dad, well, Genise says she's going to be fine. Lay off a bit, right? My dad was telling me about what the conversation he had. He goes, I'm not worried about you at all. I'm more worried about him. And I just think it's just because he has always been like, you could do whatever you want to do. You could do it. And no one could stop you unless you let them. Yeah. So that's how that's worked for me from the confidence. Being a twice divorced person, that has sometimes hit my self-confidence a bit because it's just like, am I the problem? And in some cases I am, right? I am the problem. But in some cases, it's just the nature of this environment that we're in for dating and everything like that. So sometimes I do struggle with self-confidence in that space because I do present strong to a lot of people. I've heard this from men. You're masculine.
We're going to get into that stuff in part 2 of our conversations. I'm going to give a little plug for my membership here.
Oh, okay.
Listeners and viewers, if you have not checked out my Elevate membership yet, I encourage you to do so. Don't worry, the link is right there in the show notes. My Elevate membership is $25 a month. It covers one topic a month. You can see all the details on my website. But part 2 of my guest episodes, it's the extended, really juicy stuff, is in my Elevate membership exclusively. So you're listening to part 1 here for the general public, but if you want to hear the rest of the scoop on any of my guest episodes, go and join my Elevate membership. Okay, Genise.
Self-care.
Yeah, self-care. On your self-confidence note, I want to say thank you for sharing. It depends on the situation. Sometimes you have more self-confidence than others. That's very human. All of us can relate to that. When you have those areas of self-confidence, you can find those in the other parts of your life too. You may need a little cheerleader sometimes, someone that is a good friend or a mentor or a parent that can give you that extra boost and remind you that you are amazing.
Remind you who the F you are.
And he expects that of you. Your dad had standards for you, which you had not had to that point in your life. And he continually has those expectations for you because you can. He knows that you can and that you will.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree.
Let's talk about self-care. How do you make sure that you take care of Genise in all of this?
It's so underwhelming.
Well, that's a beautiful thing about self-care is that it's individual for each person, right?
Yeah. So my self-care is I literally get my nails done, get my hair done. I sit in the house. I love sitting in the house, watching some marathon of something. I think I've seen too many movies. Now I'm running out of stuff to watch. I just like those moments by myself where I'm pampering myself and saying nothing to no one.
Yeah. Quiet alone time.
Beautiful. It's beautiful. That's really how I rejuvenate myself and replenish myself for the week or for whatever. I just take that time by myself.
I'm glad that you do. Have you ever struggled with that in your life? Self-care?
No, not so much. Because you know why? Because my second husband, he was so big on go get your hair done, go get your nails done, go do that. So he was just always pushing it. And I didn't struggle with it. I just never could afford it. prior to that, right?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
was what it was. And he had the means. And so he'd just be like, go do this. And now I can't live without it. There's no way. I'd need a second job if I had to stop. But that's just what I do for myself. I love interior decorating. I love fashion. I love makeup. I probably love makeup more and skincare more than anything. That's where I spend so much of my time. That's self-care for me. It's just feeling good, looking good, and trying to maintain this not so youthful look.
Well, that's a good segue because we are women in midlife and beyond. And that's who's listening. That's who's watching, women in midlife and beyond. We all have our favorite parts of this time of life, but I would like to hear yours. What is your favorite thing about the flip side of midlife?
I don't have kids to raise.
Mm.
I can drop my granddaughter off and say goodbye. That's the best part because I spent my childhood, my young years being a parent. I was listening to somebody where they were saying a lot of people who had trauma or had to grow up fast tend to spend their later part of the years almost doing the opposite and becoming childlike and a little bit on the immature side. And I kind of feel like that's where I'm just going back down in age versus going up. But there's so much wisdom that has come along the way. I'm lucky because I'll be young with some wisdom. I just prefer to have this time where I can just do whatever I want, whenever I want. I don't have to worry about a babysitter or who's going to pick up who at daycare. Am I co-parenting with some? I don't have to worry about that. It's all good.
Many of us have many things that we love about this phase of life, but I always ask this question on my podcast because it's a different answer every time. And everyone listening and watching can say, oh yeah, that is pretty great.
Yeah. Yeah, I used to give myself a hard time because it was like, I had my kids so young. But it's like, shit, I had my kids young. I'm still relatively young. So I can go do whatever I want to do. And I'm in very good health for the most part. This is the time that I can actually live my life and do the things that I always dreamed of doing. That's what I like about this part of life for me.
Thank you so much for sharing that. We're going to wrap up part one of our conversation right here. I want to, again, thank you for showing up. Thank you for spending your time with me and for sharing your story. And for those of you out there watching and listening, I hope you will go to flipsideofmidlife.com, check out my Elevate membership so that you can hear part two of my conversation with Genise Dawson. Thank you so much for being here today and keep listening to my episodes of Flipside of Midlife.